Hi, I'm Karen McDaniel, and I'm from the Place4Grace, and we serve children with incarcerated parents. Well, our organization was founded in 2009. I'm a child trauma specialist by trade, a child development specialist, and I really found a gap in services for children whose parents had been incarcerated. And so we began doing our work slowly through advocacy work, helping children get to be able to see their incarcerated parent. Statistics show that maintaining family bonds during incarceration really improves outcomes for children and the incarcerated parent, and hence the community. And our program grew into two core programs, and one of them is our father-to-child reading program. And in that program, we go into California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation institutions throughout the state. There are 33 adult prisons here in California. And we go in and we video record and or digitally record father reading a book to his child. We then take the book and the recording and we send it home to his child. And we started out as a literacy project because the benefits seem obvious in terms of literacy benefits.
And what are those benefits?
Well, of course, the most obvious and what we had intended, and what Virginia Commonwealth University is confirming for us through their studies, is that our children that receive books are showing a 87% increase in likeliness to read daily, okay? The other thing that we're seeing, which we really didn't expect, is an increase on the other end on dad's literacy level. Most of our incarcerated fathers are operating at the second, third, fourth grade literacy level. This is part of the reason of their incarceration. They came from very impoverished communities. I can tell you that most of our dads, the book that they read to their children is probably the first children's book that they've ever held in their hand. They didn't even have those coming up. And so what we see is that dad's literacy level begins to rise as well. And that means a whole lot for rehabilitation, because one of the key aspects for getting people who are incarcerated ready to come home is getting them educated. And that has to come through motivation, and what better to motivate you than your child? The Place4Grace could not continue our programs without the books that we take into the institutions. We're a nonprofit organization, and we just do not receive funding that allows us to purchase books. So through First Books, the partnership with Molina, and through Disney, we're able to take the books we receive and put those directly in the hands of the children and fathers. So for example, today we're picking up 850 books. But I want people to understand that that translates into 850 fathers in a prison that will read, 850 children that will open an envelope and get a book from their father, and they will follow along with his voice as we go. And I wanted to share one of, I guess, an intimate story, if you will, that really helps people understand what goes on when we go into an institution. Last week I was in an institution in Calipatria, in Imperial County, California, very, very rural area. So children would have to travel hundreds of miles to be able to see their parent. So that doesn't happen often. And we were filming some what we call mainline dads, and that means dads who are still active in gang life. And I had a young 19-year-old man in a very small, what we call attorney's room with me as we were getting ready to have him read. And he kind of started out, you know, a little bit hard, a little bit tough, you know, yeah. And he read Curious George. And there was such intonation in his voice, and his face came alive. And when he got to the end, he closed the book and he whispered to me. He said, "Can I say something else?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, and he leaned to the recorder and he said, "Okay, mijo, keep reading books so you can keep going to school and you never come here. One of our dads came in and he literally had tattoos all over his face, and he was a very young man, and he was fidgeting in his chair as he sat down to get ready to read. And suddenly he started grabbing at his chest. And I mean, I could see physical pain in him. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, I'm in pain, I'm feeling pain. And I said, "Well, do we need to call medical?" And he said, "No, I think it's my heart." And I said, "Are you telling me that your heart's hurting for your child?" And he said, "Yes." And so we took a few minutes before he started reading his book, and he got through it. And at the end, I said, "How is your heart feeling now?" And he said, "A lot better, Miss Karen." And I said, "Well, let me ask you something." I said, "You're a great reader. I loved listening to you read that story. I couldn't stop listening." I said, "Can I ask you what grade you finished?" And he said, "6th grade." And I said, "Okay, cool." I said, "Have you ever thought about working on a GED?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, what if I told you you could read more books in my program if you were willing to do that?" And he said, "I can do that." And I said, "Do it, because I'll be back." For a lot of our children, this is the very first book that their father has ever read to them. For many of us, some of our fondest memories are being in the laps of our parents and having them read to us. And our kids were robbed of that opportunity by no fault of their own. Children that have an incarcerated parent have committed no crime, you see, and yet no one comes to their rescue or their aid. So to get this book in the mail says a lot to them. It says, "Oh, my dad's okay." Because everything they see on TV in a Scooby-Doo cartoon to lock up is very scary to a young child thinking about their dad away in prison. And when that book comes, they say, "Oh gosh, he's okay. He sent me a book and a tape." Yes, that's one thing. Then they open and they begin to read. And dad usually sends a message in the tape, "I want you to tell me what you think about this book." So it's also a bridge for communication, okay? But something that we never expected was it's a social emotional reward to the child, because our children can't call dad at the end of the day when something's gone terribly wrong or something's gone really wonderful at soccer that day. You see, sometimes when our kids stub their toe and fall off their bike and they just want their dad, they can't have him. But by sending the book in tape, they finally have a little bit of power that was taken away from them when their father went to prison, and then they can go and they can put it in the tape recorder and they can follow along with their dad. And it seems so simple to kids that have dads at home, but it means everything to a child who desperately needs their father.